His record is actually getting good reviews. It is being ignored. Listen to Jared Bernstein. He showed up. He was on Fox over the weekend. Why are you
Jared
laughing?
Bernstein.
What, a chief economic advisor? That's
Why doesn't the president say anything?
He shows
What did he
up
do
and,
today?
in fact, this idea that Trump is blowing him out of the water is just not supported by the data. You love the Real Clear Politics average.
Yes, it's
within the it's within the margin of error. Look at the last 3 or 4 polls.
You do this data, and it's always out of context.
So,
All right,
stop.
With President Biden reportedly entering campaign mode, liberal commentator Jessica Tarlov schooled her MAGA-sympathizing Fox News co-hosts on the president's objectively impressive record. And she called out the media for their lazy and negligent coverage of that record, which was best embodied most recently by a viral CNN moment that we have to talk about. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, I have several clips for us to play, but we're going to begin with this 2-minute-long clip from the most recent episode of the Fox propaganda show, The Five. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Jessica Tarlov has the hardest job in mainstream media because she is a liberal/progressive commentator in the lion's den up against 4 very prolific right-wing propagandists, Jesse Waters, Dana Perino, Jeanine Pirro, and Greg Gutfeld, who constantly heckle and disrupt her as a unified front because they can't compete with her on the facts. And that is still demonstrated even in this clip. Even in 2024, nothing has changed. So let's play the clip and we'll unpack it together.
It's Phil. He's got nothing else to offer. Trump is beating him, and he's beating him for good reason. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, Jessica, I mean, it is the case that if you're an incumbent, you want to make the election a choice between 2 people and not a referendum on your record, especially if the record is getting the kind of reviews that Biden's is.
His record is actually getting good reviews. It is being ignored. There were people all over our own airwaves, from the Wall Street Journal to people from the Biden campaign, talking about the economic record, talking about what Bidenomics has done for the average person. The Wall Street Journal ran editorials, ran reported pieces about all the optimism heading into it. The stock market is exploding. The jobless rate's down. Inflation is easing. Gas prices, we never talked about. Remember when you guys told me, drill, baby, drill. He won't drill. We're now producing more oil than any other country in history. 13.3 million barrels coming
But they don't want to claim that as an accomplishment.
Yeah, no, they do. Listen to Jared Bernstein. He showed up. He was on Fox over the weekend. Why are you
Jared
laughing?
Bernstein.
What, a chief economic advisor? That's
Why doesn't the president say anything?
He shows
What did he
up
do
and,
today?
in fact, what?
He had nothing on his schedule, but he just got back from 2 weeks in the Caribbean.
So I want to stop there real quick because a lot was said there. Again, notice how they interrupt and heckle as a unified front. First Dana Perino, then Jesse Waters. The other 2 are about to jump in here in just a second. But everything Jessica Tarlov said is correct. I'm going to show you a recent example of a CNN viral moment in which a major Biden accomplishment was discussed and the president and Democrats were not named one time. It was criminally negligent. But the facts are the facts. We've talked about this before. The macroeconomic data are clear. The same indicators that we use to evaluate every iteration of the American economy show that, objectively speaking, the economy under President Biden, by the same metrics that we evaluated the Trump economy, the Obama economy, all the way back to George Washington, the economy is good, right? Not to minimize the legitimate financial pain that many millions of Americans continue to experience, okay? But the macroeconomic indicators are what they are. And then with respect to the drilling and the gas prices, so this is where it's a mixed bag. If lowering gas prices is your priority, and if doing so requires domestic energy production, as far as you're concerned, drilling and fracking, then you do have to give Biden top scores here because he was approving drilling and fracking permits at a higher rate than Trump was. He was taking every precaution he could, or exercising every power available to his office to try to reduce gas prices. Of course, oil companies were maximizing their profits and not looking to increase production so they could continue to price gouge their customers. Joe Biden is not responsible for that. He's the president of the United States, not the CEO of ExxonMobil. But again, Fox propagandists deliberately blur the line. To Dana Perino's point, she's like, well, the Biden administration doesn't brag about this. They do. And again, if lowering gas prices is politically efficacious, and there's reason to believe it is, then they probably should be bragging about it more. But what I will tell you is, as a progressive who believes, climate change is real and we have to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, you could actually make a compelling case that Biden's doing the wrong thing from the perspective of the left, right? But as far as these people are concerned, they should be applauding the president, right? Because domestic energy production is higher now than it ever was under Donald Trump. But these people will lie to you. They say the opposite. We used to be energy independent under Trump. Well, we're actually more energy independent now under Biden, but they'll imply otherwise. So again, all these things are important, and Jessica does such a great job of fact checking them in real time. Let's continue.
The idea that Trump is blowing him out of the water is just not supported by the data. You love the Real Clear Politics average.
Yes, it
it's
is.
it's within the margin of error. Look at the last 3 or 4 polls. Trump's up 2 in one, then it's tied in the other, then Biden's up 1 in the other. If you believe that Trump will win by 20 points of the black vote, I have many, many bridges to sell you, or the youth vote. The guy.
Real quick, did you hear Dana Perino say that's true? This is how good she is, that despite the opposition, despite the heckling, despite the disruption, she will still collect concessions from these people who are so hardwired not to give them to her. That's how much better she is, how much smarter she is, and how much more the facts are on her side than theirs. She is supreme over these people.
And by 20 points of the black vote, I have many, many bridges to sell you, or the youth vote. The guy had Vanilla Ice at his New Year's Eve party, and you think he's winning?
How dare you, Jessica?
How dare you defend
I have
that?
heard a lot from you over the years, but that will not stand.
Ice, baby, you're losing the youth vote.
Yeah, but do you know what? You do this data, and it's always out of context.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. It's out of context. We're coming off a pandemic. So it's like, hey, we're getting jobs back. It's like, yes, because everything went down like that.
Pandemic is over.
All right.
Stop. Collaboration.
Do you see that? Do you see that? They heckle, they interrupt her as one. It's like it's the peanut gallery, because they can't contend with her on the facts. And they interrupt her there at the end when they say, when he yells at her to stop. I just want to say one thing. Greg Gutfeld tries to sneak this in there. Sure, the data, the macroeconomic data, that they're on Biden's side, but you got to put it in context, right? First, again, note the double standard. When they used to brag about the Trump economy, they never clarified that those were mere continuations of Obama-era trends. They wanted to give Trump singular credit for the state of the economy in the first 3 years of his presidency. Again, the double standard. They don't want to count the 4th year of his presidency. And they basically, Trump entered this vacuum and single-handedly created a great economy, which, as I've talked with you before about, Obama, let's use the metaphor of a skyscraper. Obama inherited a gaping pit left for him by George W. Bush. It was the recession that Obama inherited. And then Obama built a 100-story skyscraper. And then Trump comes along and builds 3 or 4 other stories on top of it, right? He continues the trend. He doesn't build nearly as much on his own. He merely continues to add stories to it. And they want to give him credit for the whole damn thing, and then ignore the fact that the very next year, he was in charge when the entire skyscraper collapsed. That's what the Fox propaganda was. So it wants to do. So those of us on the left or whatever, those of us who are just sane should push back on all of that. Like, no, I reject the premise. And if we're going to contextualize things, then you're under the same obligation. And I demand concessions from you about the Trump economy. But all that aside, let's address the fact. So he says, listen, you can't give Biden credit for the jobs because we were just coming out of a pandemic. Well, again, that pandemic occurred on Donald Trump's watch. He mismanaged the COVID pandemic recovery. Those jobs were lost on Donald Trump's watch. You would never, if the shoe was on the other foot, grade a Democrat on a curve. So we're not going to grade Trump on a curve. I'm sorry to hurt your feelings about it. And then when it comes to the pandemic recovery, Biden does get credit for that. Biden was the one who came up with the American Rescue Plan, right? Biden was the one who oversaw the vaccination rollout, which allowed the economy to open up safely again. Biden made deliberative legislative and executive decisions which contributed to the COVID recovery, the pandemic recovery. So he gets the credit for it. Trump gets no credit for it. And on top of all of that, even if you don't count the COVID pandemic recovery, like the return to the job level, okay, I don't accept that premise. I'm not going to grant you that. But even if I did, even if I was super charitable, even if you count for that, more jobs have been created monthly under Joe Biden than Donald Trump during the comparable amount of time. So even then, by Greg Gutfeld's own standard, Donald Trump is inferior. He's just objectively inferior to Joe Biden. Now, some other things I want to point out here. We're going to point out, again, the 2023 economy shattered expectations since we're talking about the record growth, GDP, job growth, unemployment, S&P 500, the stock market, which is the only metric that conservatives tend to care about, experienced all-time highs. It's higher. It performed better under Joe Biden in terms of its highs than it ever did under Donald Trump, who predicted that we would hit a double-digit recession, right, that the stock market would crater. And that didn't happen. We have economic data to indicate that consumer confidence is beginning to climb, indicating that despite what people may say in polls, they feel that the economy is doing better. They are spending the economy or behaving economically as if the economy is doing better. And now that brings us to the last clip I want to play, which is this viral clip from CNN. So Jessica Tarlov calls out the media. She says, listen, he's got a great record. And when people know about it, they do give him good reviews, but the media doesn't talk about it. This is a perfect example. We're not going to play the whole thing, but I urge you to check it out. This is CNN and their chief medical correspondent talking about how drug makers, pharmaceutical companies, are capping insulin prices at $35. Let's play some of this and we'll unpack it.
Well, here with me now with the details. Meg, this is good news for a lot of people.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, these are initiatives that the drug makers, Sanofi, Novo Nordisk, and Eli Lilly started introducing last year, capping the copays, basically the out-of-pocket costs for people who need insulin at $35. Now, you can do this through coupons or various mechanisms. For the uninsured, it can be a little bit different for people with commercial insurance. But basically, this is expected to be good news across the board. And more than 8 million people in the United States rely on insulin to live.
That is all great news. Absolutely great news. The problem is, if you watch that entire thing, they omit to mention that President Biden was responsible for it. Trash for not mentioning the Biden administration being solely responsible for this. Why can't you just say thank you, POTUS, and the Inflation Reduction Act? Thank you. Thanks to Joe Biden and Democrats, every single Republican voted against cutting prices for insulin. This is a provision of the Inflation Reduction Act in which many pharmaceutical companies would then be compelled by the government to cap insulin. Okay, so they're just getting ahead of the game before the provision takes effect. Joe Biden gets the credit for this. Democrats get the credit for this. Republicans get none of the credit. They promised for years that they would do this, never pulled it off, and then voted against legislation which mandated it. They get zero credit. Every responsible media source who really believes in being objective should call that out. This is only happening after President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, and every Republican voted against it. We need to call balls and strikes. But the media doesn't mention it. And that's not Fox News. That was CNN, right? What's Donald Trump called? The Clinton News Network. They're omitting that, right? This is the media landscape in which President Biden and Democrats and liberals and the left in general, in which we are forced to operate. It is a hostile media environment where mistakes or perceived mistakes, perceived failures are vastly overexposed and overinflated and overreported. And any successes are either ignored outright or underreported. And Republicans are consistently graded on a curve, right? We can speculate as to why. My theory is because CNN knows that reality has a well-known liberal bias, right? That things tend to favor the left on the facts and Democrats on the left. But if they report it that way, then they'll be seen as partisan, right? That's the conundrum for the media. They're kind of cowards in that respect. And so they create this false equivalence in order to avoid being tarred and feathered as the liberal media. And then the irony is they're tarred and feathered as the liberal media anyway, so it doesn't do anybody any good. Anyway, food for thought. I love that clip and performance from Jessica Tarlov. I'm excited to see President Biden and the Democratic Party in general gear up for campaign mode because this is going to be a brutal campaign. The stakes could not possibly be higher, and democracy's on the line. Let me know what you think in the comments.